Well, hello, everybody. I want to just say welcome to Expanding Frontiers Research, and it's really always fun for me to get into the show stream and to look at chat and to see Jim and Ivy Bells and Michael, P&L, Peter, of course. Thank you so much, Bill Pullen. And I've got to go up because Emily is here, and I just want to give her a shout out and just say what a wonderful interview I had last Saturday with Emily Louise at Weird Reads. And I will post links to this as well and share them on Twitter, which I do because I am very happy to know other people who are younger, especially, who are taking an interest in this topic and other interesting topics and doing such a thorough job of researching and putting together beautiful documentaries. I think this is really exciting. And as I mentioned on my last show and on, I think, pretty much every show I do, we are really creating a community. And this is important for all of us to create a safe space to make sure we're getting good information, that we're giving each other feedback and not becoming an echo chamber. I really have a positive feeling about the way we're moving forward together as a community. Try as they might, all the little agitators and bearers of gloom and doom and all of this, all of the Dave Grushes in the world and people who are promoting false information. I'm glad that we can do our research and try to put good information out. You can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out the wonderful work that we're doing with the organization. And I want to just tell you about our latest. So the last post that we did 2 days ago was about the Unabomber FBI records. And we have made a request for all of the records with regard to Ted Kaczynski, who was the Unabomber and an eco-terrorist, somebody that had quite an impact in our country. And we are putting out the word. So if you would like to help us on Patreon, and we appreciate the people that have donated to EFR, but it's critical to understand the money that we need to do records requests. And we know that this is in the best interest to put these things forward to the public so we can learn about specific periods of history. We can get that good information and do proper work. So I want to just give a shout out to Jack Brewer and also talk a little bit about the past posts that we have made, the body recovered near Skinwalker Ranch. This is going to be an unfolding story. We have put in a records request for a body that was recovered near Skinwalker Ranch. We have reason to believe that this is going to be a very good story. We have reason to believe that this is going to be a good story. How's that for a little teaser? But and we also want to just say that we don't take things like this lightly. These are very serious matters, and I've stressed a million times before on the show that it is really important and to all of us to make sure that we are getting good information out, because a lot of times misinformation or disinformation gets out, and it is really harmful to people that are listening to that information. And for me, having had up close and personal experiences with the Skinwalker Ranch group, nothing they put out is of merit. Nothing they put out is substantiated. They're putting out fictitious narratives that have potentially damaging effects to people that are in very vulnerable situations. And so I just want to just give that a little shout out there. We also have records requests that we received from Salt Lake City Police Department about Joe Firmage, who was a big fixture in the UFO scene and also a big fixture in Utah, because he was a big tech startup guy that did quite wonderful things early on in his career, but unfortunately has been accused of assaulting an elderly person. So again, take a look at our work, Expanding Frontiers Research, donate, and just know that we appreciate everything. So now I'm bringing in somebody that I never get tired of talking to. In fact, I talked to Barry for 2.5 hours this afternoon.
I don't know.
I never get tired of it.
I can't understand it. I'm boring.
I don't think you're boring. And I will say that, I just want to give you a little shout out, because one of these days.
The same book, by the way. They're not two different books.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying I've got many different copies.
Oh, wow. Oh,
Yeah.
hardcover? Oh, those aren't easy to find anymore.
Well, I know. I'm hoarding your book.
Wow.
I know.
That means
It's
that
great.
means it's still surviving and people are still reading it. But I had to do a considerable updating via the newsletter I used to do, Just Cause. And years ago, I was a FOIA maniac too, like you guys are now.
Right. And let's, for people, first of all, I want to just tell people that are listening for the first time about you. You are an archivist and historian. And if there's any doubt about that, you can look behind you and see stacks and stacks, boxes and boxes of one of a kind material that you have painstakingly spent your life preserving for other people to make sure that we're getting this history that is really important, not just because we're searching for UFOs, but we're getting a history of the topic, the subtle nuances, the interactions between groups and specific researchers. And it really is a truly dynamic and fascinating conversation.
Well, it's not as neat looking as yours. For one reason, I'm running out of room to be able to make it look neat, so I just have to stack it, and stacks fall over and hit me on the head and all that. There's just not much I can do about it anymore. It's
Do
out
you
of
need a
control.
helmet?
I've slowed down a lot on acquisitions and all. Thank goodness for the internet, because all of what I've done since about 1999 has been largely electronic, so I can store things on a hard drive, whereas before I had to do paper. And that's where I'm at with this now.
Well, you know what? It's amazing to me, and I think, as you know, this is such an obscure topic. There aren't a lot of people that have done what you've done as far as preserving the history. And now that everything is electronic, we're not going to see all of the paper files anymore. And those are going to be things that hopefully at some point, that will kind of be not coming to an end, but it's not going to be such a heady project for you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been hearing talk lately about people discussing preserving history and archiving and all, and that they believe we're in, or we've entered, or are actually in a dark age now, information wise, where you had things printed on paper before and they're accessible in libraries and all, but with the advent of electronic storage, you have to keep up with the technology or else you can lose a lot of this. People send emails instead of letters, and you can lose emails. You can lose whole swaths of emails through little glitches and problems. Your computer can crash. You lose all the data on your computer unless you have it backed up, which is a big argument for backing up. But yeah, they think it is a lot of information now that's being generated that can easily disappear, and that's disturbing. You're almost
You know,
inclined to want to save things on paper after you get them electronically, but that just compounds the problem of space.
well, and that really does bring up a good point, especially right now when there's so many vulnerabilities with, cybersecurity. And if you've got government agencies or, healthcare, universities, different institutions that are being attacked and held as ransom for information, it really does stress to each of us the importance of our own cybersecurity, making sure that we're being safe and we're not clicking links and downloading things from anonymous sources and so on and so on. But I think also, as far as preserving that history, having information in multiple sources is critical. And so what do you recommend with regard to that? Like, how do you've done all of your work scanning, what is the process for you getting information out to different places so everything will be safe?
Well, the main issue is making sure it's duplicated. It's pointless if you scan something and just keep one copy in your house. Same thing can happen with paper. If you have a fire or something, you lose it all. Electronically, the same thing. So it should be duplicated and also stored in safe locations, not just with your friends and relatives, but people you know, in the subject that can take care of it. And I've done that with a lot of my files. I've taken hard drives of my documents and give them to a few people, and they won't get lost that way. The more copies, the better. So
And,
that's the main concern. Just make sure you salt seed things around so they don't become misplaced.
and is there, I mean, I think as far as having a succession plan, that's something that we're working on. In fact, we're going to be having a board meeting with EFR, so prepare yourself about, what we'll do, how we'll make sure that the information that we have, the work that we've done is passed on and preserved and given to, if things happen and board members are replaced, how other people will come up to speed and make sure again that our work is carried forward.
Right. Well, EFR at present, it's you, myself, and Jack, and each one of these should have a backup, at least one backup, so that in case something dire happens, you'll have someone there ready to take over, and hopefully it can be local too, because suppose your own facilities have some sort of a catastrophe, someone's got to be able to go down and go to your place and see what can be salvaged and retrieved of anything you have. So I mean that again, to me, it's a simple thing. It's a simple precaution to take for anyone. Just take care of your things and make sure people know about them that can act on them later on in case you can't.
Right. And I've been very, aware of my security for apparent reasons and made sure that people that are local, have access to things and can come in and then interact with people on my board, and to make sure that, that these things are kept safe and are going to a home that will make sure that the archiving process will continue.
Yeah, well, you had an issue yourself a while back, didn't you? With
Which one?
your business, you had an electrical problem
You know,
outside.
that was, that was really interesting. In fact, everybody that, I think most of the people that are here listening tonight will remember that. I know Peter will for sure. I was doing a show maybe a couple summers ago, and we had the electricity went out. The show, I went off the air, and it was, half of the electrical stuff. It was like a brownout inside. So some things were working, and I was trying to run defense with show things. And then I stepped outside and saw the fire truck and everybody outside, and they were looking at an electrical fire from a light pole that was right adjacent to the building. The fence was on fire. There was a fire that the fire came onto the roof of the business, and luckily everybody was there. But it is one of those things that it makes you aware of that situation and understand the importance of keeping things like in my immediate surroundings, having fire extinguishers everywhere, having a protocols for what would happen in case of an emergency, and how things would roll out like that. So there are lots of different ways of, that you have to look at archiving and having things that are very precious. And I think this, not only, are you worrying about fires and different things, floods, but you also have to know when you're storing specific documents that you have to, there's a way that they have to be stored, as you have taught me. And it is important that they're in, an environment that is not exposed to sunlight. They're not exposed to moisture. There are lots of factors that go into preserving work.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of work in preparing the material too. If you have a large collection of paper, you have to get that ready for scanning. You don't just take them and throw them in the scanner and that's it. They have to be unfolded. Tape repairs have to be changed. Sometimes tape gets dried, falls apart, and you send a document through in multiple pieces as a result. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure everything is in good shape before you even consider throwing them into a scanner. And we've learned a lot from doing that with high-speed equipment and all. You have to take every little clip and staple out, or else you will create a problem. So, again, anyone considering doing that kind of work in a large scale, it's easy to do on a small scale, but large scale, it's a little more complicated. They should talk to someone who's done it before, make sure they're going to do it the right way.
And it is tedious. I mean, it literally is not for the faint of heart, because it is such a process. And I think people just assume you're going to get this, batch of documents, and you're going to, throw it through the scanner, and then, put it up online, and that's an easy process. But as I've talked to with both you and Jack, how do you get the dedicated space online? How do you make, everything work so you're giving a history of what you're putting online, and doing, what you need to do with the material? And it takes money, it takes dedication, it takes money.
Money and money and money. Just say money, period. That's it.
It does. I mean, I think of, I'm sure with you, I can't even imagine how much money you've spent over the years. I know in my decade in the topic, I've spent more money than I probably would have paid for a home, 10 years ago here in Utah. And so it's just, it takes a lot. And so, it's not for the faint of heart. And I think it's an important subject. I know it's an important subject, and I'm very proud to be a part of preserving the history, for sure.
I think also, even after you do a scanning job on a large archive, people think, well, that's it. It's all free now. We can get anything we want with no cost. But as you said, there's money involved with maintaining it afterwards. If you want to put things up on a website or have web storage, you have to pay for that. So that it while it's free to the people looking into the site, unless you have a paywall, the operator has to pony up more money to take care of things that were acquired years ago. Just a constant effort like that. And it's a shame that there wasn't more compensation for folks doing that over the years. And it shouldn't be looked at as just this big freebie that I can exploit. It needs support. It needs help all the time.
I mean, it absolutely does. And I want to just say hello, Ronnie. Nice to see you. And Stephanie and Rodan and everybody, thank you so much for being here again. But I want to just say, it does. Jack and I were discussing this yesterday, and, what are we going to do? How are we going to move forward when we get the Ted Kaczynski files? There's so much there. Like, do we get a private server? How are we going to logistically roll things out? What are our best options? And there are a lot of logistics that go into this as well, and like I said, this isn't right now with EFR, we aren't to the point where we are covering costs for the organization. And so it is critical, to get more people donating and paying for those costs, because you can't do this on your own. This is a group effort.
Yeah. How much Kaczynski material are you talking about?
Oh, let's just go back to our lovely blog post. So let me read this really quickly, because it is pretty incredible. So the estimated cost for the release is $1,700. It would be provided in 113 monthly releases consisting of 500 pages each.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, this isn't, luckily this is something we'll have time to raise money to get, but there are a lot of documents there. And I think, again, as I was mentioning, these are important documents for a multitude of reasons.
Right. Well, the website would be an optimum place to put material up like that. And you need the bandwidth to be able to work the materials, and also the copies. You have to enter them all yourself. Are they going to send them to you on discs or
Yes.
paper copy? Discs.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
Yep.
that should make it a little bit easier. But yeah, that's a very broad interest topic.
It is. And that's why I think that we could definitely pull people in that have an interest in other topics as well. That's what we're trying to do with EFR to begin with. You know, there's so many fascinating topics, and doing FOIA requests and doing grammar requests that in and of itself is a really fascinating project.
Mm.
So,
Any plans to go into Waco?
oh boy, you know, that could be a good one. I'll have to talk to Jack
Yeah,
about.
because it would be nice to have a large database on cult activities like that for people to consult. That might be a broad topic you can consider getting into, because it does touch on the UFO topic somewhat. There are cult beliefs in this UFO topic. A lot of people harbor strange beliefs, as we all know, and they're using it to try to influence public opinion and steer the whole narrative. And we're trying our best to prevent that from happening, but it's a real uphill battle.
You know, it is, and that brings up a great point. We've done a lot of work with regards to Ramtha, Jay-Z Knight, and have obtained a substantial amount of information about Jay-Z Knight and the goings-ons in her compound and around that area. And so these are important documents, and documenting, like you mentioned, cult behavior and you know, people, FBI, federal law enforcement looking into things like this, their responses. These are all important topics, I believe. So
Now, is it still true that Jay-Z Knight is affiliated with MUFON?
I am not sure if, you know, I would like to substantiate that. I would not, I wouldn't be surprised if she isn't, because she was at one point in time a pretty big donor to MUFON, from my understanding.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'd be curious about that, because if she's still there and having an influence, then I'd be a bit concerned. I mean, yeah, it's concerns about MUFON anyway, regardless of whether Knight is involved. But that just kind of looks strange to have a cult leader involved with the MUFON organization high up like that. It would be bothersome to me. And I mean, I haven't been connected to MUFON for 40 years, but it's from what I see, things that happened in the past are still happening.
Yes, and you bring up a really great point. I mean, is she still actively involved? And why? To my knowledge, they never actually mentioned or took responsibility or, you know, owned up to the Jay-Z Knight involvement, and that was really brought to the surface when the John Ventry scandal happened. And for people who don't know about John Ventry was a state director for the Mutual UFO Network. If you don't know about the Mutual UFO Network, that is an organization that was started in the 1968.
Thereabouts.
And
MUFON
the
itself
mutual,
was, I think, 67.
yeah, yeah, it's okay. Thank you.
Mm.
And so, very interesting organization. We've done some work over the years looking at tax records and various things, but they also, at one point in time, most of you know in chat about this, but they also sold their information to Robert Bigelow of Bigelow Aerospace, formerly Bigelow Aerospace, and you know, that in and of itself was a huge scandal. But yeah, I think these are good questions. In fact, I was looking through, I was on the phone with you earlier, and I meant to post some things, but I will in a little bit later in the show. But I had one of the books from the unit that worked for Bigelow in MUFON, and it was very interesting. I think I read you a little snippet of what they were saying, you know, so the whole thing is fascinating. But why would cult leaders be, you know, financing that? John Ventry was featured in a Newsweek story about MUFON and their racist belief system. racist ideology that they were promoting, not necessarily MUFON in general, maybe MUFON in general, but he was, espousing some pretty nasty rhetoric things. So,
yeah, yeah. Well, they're still out there. They're still, promoting the narrative of MUFON. Really, fundamentally, still pushes UFOs as something exotic, unusual, extraterrestrials. They've sponsored materials that push that point of view. I think that's probably not something that should be done, and they should pull back and try to be more non-committal to unusual beliefs in UFOs. But we discussed this earlier, that it can be damaging to try to take a serious tone on the topic too, because if you adopt a scientific attitude, you want to take cases, investigate them, and if the investigations reveal that the incident is a little difficult to explain, you can't quite pinpoint it and all, you put it down as such. You put it down as, well, unsolved. We don't know what it is, rather than say, well, it looks like there's evidence of extraterrestrials involved here. If it's an unexplained story, that's a leap of logic that shouldn't happen. But that reserving a leap of logic can hurt you as a business, because people aren't excited by neutral conclusions. They want to hear about something unusual, about aliens or time travelers or fourth dimensional travel, and it's not thrilling to hear about, well, it's unexplained and let's move along from there. I think that's where you cross a bridge onto people's personal beliefs and what they want it to be, rather than what evidence reveals the incident is about, or incidents.
and I know that is very true. It's exciting, and obviously we wouldn't have so many shows on TV about ghost hunters and people that are digging for treasure in the same place and coming up with nothing, or shining, lasers up into the wherever, and pretending like they have head injuries. But it's so there is that need to, that there's something exciting about the chase, the pursuit of something unknown. But I also think, when you look at the wonderful job that NASA has done about, creating all of these avenues for people to go learn about space exploration, learn about technology. I mean, those things, to me, they do such a great job at putting together their material that it is exciting. And I think it just depends on whether you've got people who are adept enough to make a story exciting. I mean,
Right.
it can be done.
Well, NASA has the advantage of millions of dollars to pay people to do professional things with their information, whereas UFO groups have little or nothing, and they have to wing it, and that's a problem.
Well, I would certainly say that MUFON has a little bit more than nothing,
Oh,
but
MUFON, yeah. I'm talking in general. MUFON does have ample funds and all, but as UFO research has gone over the years, it's survived on breadcrumbs, basically. Not much money around, and you're very limited as to what you can do with lack of funding. You need facilities, you need manpower. It's hard to get. And now they have it. MUFON has it, but it's a business. It's a business that was infused with money back in the early 2000s by Bigelow, and their income has been pretty decent compared to other organizations over the years. And what needs to be done is to, I think, treat that increase in funding with a little more responsibility.
right. And I just want to say thank you for that donation. That was amazing. That was really, really kind. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That just made my weekend. So thanks. But yeah, sorry. Anyway, I'm very excited about that. So very, very cool. I think that, and I know what you mean. There is, you need to have money to make an organization fly. But look at what we've done with EFR with, out of our own pocket. I think we've accomplished things that are I'm very, very proud of. The records request, the latest with the State Records Committee, and making that great victory that we had. I mean, all of these things we're doing with 3 people. And so I think that, if we did have a lot of funding, we could do even more things. But I think people also need to be creative. And when you look at maybe the UFO topic, people, they have a great skill set in some areas, but they don't have a skill set that's needed to be in a public forum and to create information that is fun and exciting without it being fictitious. I mean, I think that, do you know what I mean? I think that it's just, you can find ways to make, even if you're going out and doing an investigation and nothing happens, that story, the adventure, getting your equipment together. What kind of equipment do you have? All of these things can be exciting. It's not just, finding the freaking shape-shifting demonic werewolf or, the mothership and the dead bodies.
Have you heard anything about the body that was found near the ranch?
We are waiting for records on that. And, that, like I was mentioning at the beginning of the story, that's going to be something that will be unfolding. And, yeah, that's a very sad story.
Yeah, because I'm thinking that if that's something related to belief in the paranormal events at Skinwalker Ranch, and the person somehow just passed on. There wasn't a medical issue and all. There was something disturbing. Then that is almost reminiscent of, in a mini way, of what happened with Heaven's Gate. Whereas you had Art Bell come on and talk about a UFO photo that someone had taken, not having much background on it, and then discussing, well, it looks like some kind of an object, a spacecraft. And then another person comes on and expresses the belief that it was something coming in behind the comet, leading Heaven's Gate folks to think that, well, the aliens are coming to save us. The only way we can go is to off ourselves, which they did. It's irresponsible information. It's irresponsible to do that. And if there's in any way people are thinking that going to Skinwalker Ranch is going to do something physically or mentally to them by being nearby, and then someone passes on as a result, that's a terrible thing. That shouldn't be happening, and they should nip it in the bud soon. There should be more condemnation of any unsupportable claims about that, to make people just back off and not take it too seriously until there's evidence otherwise, and there hasn't been so far.
And you bring up such a great point, and we talked about Heaven's Gate on the show that you were on, a couple weeks ago. Yeah. And we did receive some interesting email and people, a couple people saying that this isn't the responsibility, and how dare you, shame Art Bell and things like that. But there is a responsibility. The media has a responsibility to put forward information that is factual. Our government has a responsibility to put forward information that is factual.
If you knowingly disseminate untested, untried information, rumor only, without considering how many different types of people are out there who may or may not believe in the untested information that you're discussing, that's extremely irresponsible, and it should be condemned. And go out and check your data. If Art Bell and others at the time had checked into the photo more without adding on an unusual narrative to it, that it was a spacecraft coming in, they would have found out what was found out later, that it was a very out of focus image of the planet Saturn. That's all it was.
But they didn't care. They don't and I think that, for people to actually say that that others don't bear responsibility when you're creating a narrative, that to me is just stupidity, to be honest with you. It's my responsibility to give the people in my community good information. It's my responsibility to give my family members good information. It is my responsibility as, a citizen of Utah, and as somebody who lives in the United States, who is, concerned about our country's direction. It's my information. We all have to get good information, check our sources, and make sure we're not promoting harmful, irrational content that isn't fact-based. And you're bringing up a great point about the detriment that believing fake medical professionals and believing in certain conspiracy theories, like how much damage that can do, to our society. And so we do have a responsibility, and our
Well,
bill did
yeah.
have a
I mean,
responsibility.
that was a very sad situation with Heaven's Gate and all, but the irresponsible media still occurs to this day, to this hour. They're still peddling crazy stories. I can't believe sometimes when I look at the overseas press, how they treat the UFO topic and how insane some of it can be. The Daily Star in London is a prime example of that. Almost every day, you can see insane stories being promoted. I recall one a while back that claimed that aliens were working through seagulls.
Oh, yes,
Do
yes,
you
that was.
recall that story? That one was a beauty, but it's not the only one. I have a
Weren't they
service that my
pigeons?
pardon?
Weren't they pigeons? Like what? I mean,
No, seagulls. They were seagulls,
okay, okay.
or at least according to the stories. I don't know that for a fact, but that was the claim anyway. Uh,
And I think that I just have to say that I think there was a young fellow who started that conspiracy theory on purpose and went all over. And that actually is an interesting story in and of itself. But and he was trying to prove a point. But go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you
well, yeah,
there.
I have a service through my library in Boston that allows me to see hundreds of daily newspapers and magazines uh, in image, not as if you took them off the newsstands. It's really wonderful and allows me to keep up with current events, whereas probably normally I wouldn't do that. I'm so immersed in old matters that I hardly look at modern things. But uh, I go in there and I take a look. The U.S. press isn't so loaded with UFO stories anymore, but the foreign press really is, and they adopt the most sensational incidents and run with them. The screaming headlines that you used to see in the National Enquirer years ago. That's common in a lot of the foreign press, and as I mentioned, one in particular, the London Daily Star does this frequently, and I circulated around to friends to show them what's still happening, and it's a belly laugh, but it's really sad because
It,
some people will believe it.
it is sad, and it is interesting here in Utah. We have people that are running for the governor, to be governor, and they're promoting stories from that news outlet, if you can call it news. So there are a lot of, and there's so many with the internet. There's so many things that are popping up and places that are giving information out that aren't verified, but because you see it pop up in other places, then it becomes more reliable in your mind. And so we need to do our due diligence, and then also, I mentioned on the last show, you have to always make sure that if you're looking at a news outlet, or you want to know who owns the news outlet, who's
Mm,
controlling the information that is getting put forward. I know with the New York Post, that is owned and operated by Jared Kushner's brother,
mm,
from my understanding, which is quite interesting. I also want to just say I know several people who are incredible journalists who put themselves in harm's way, and have done that for the fact that we need to get information out on specific things happening, not only here in the country, but across the world.
mm.
And I don't want to diminish the importance or the integrity of specific journalists or outlets that are doing good work.
Mm.
Because I can't, I don't want to
Yeah.
go down the rabbit hole of saying everything is fake news. There are good, there are incredibly talented people, as we see over that are promoting stories, putting forward information that's coming out of Gaza. And those people are risking their lives.
No, I should say that, when I do look at the foreign press and all, the vast majority of them are entirely responsible. But there are specific examples that adopt the UFO topic and run with it, and those are the ones I'm criticizing. Not everybody. It's
right. I know
that should be said.
Yes. Yep.
But unfortunately, they tend to be the most garish and headline eye-catching things when you look at them, and that's probably intentional to get you to buy their papers. So, you tend to focus on. If you're looking for something on the UFO topic, you're going to see some of the craziest media carrying that topic, and the others just stay away from it and go on to other matters. But it still has some influence on people. We don't see that so much in the U.S. anymore. I mean, the tabloids have largely given up UFOs. Only occasionally they do it. I think the Globe once in a while has a big story on what's happening in Washington and all, but generally it's not what it used to be in years past.
It is interesting. And hey, Drew, nice to see you, and Scott, and Arlene. But I want to just, say that now we've had news about the Havana syndrome, and 60 Minutes broke that story again. And, again, this is what one person is saying, even though it's flying in the face of multiple sources that are saying, no, we've looked into this, there's nothing viable with this, but 60 Minutes ran with it. And it is interesting to note that 60 Minutes over the years has promoted stories such as Bob Bigelow and Lou Elizondo and To the Stars Academy and things like that. And so I definitely, news organizations or outlets that I would have once held in high regard, I'm now beginning to step back from and say, okay, what is the motivation here to promote stories, especially right now with the election coming up? What is the motivation here? So I think we all need to do ourselves a favor and make sure we question sources and all of these things. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on the Havana syndrome?
Havana syndrome reminds me of what's been going on with the so-called hitchhiker effect at Skinwalker, which I discussed in an article I did in Journal for Scientific Exploration. That claims are being made, they're being attributed to this, that, and the other thing, and there's really not a whole lot of medical information about it right now to establish what's going on. Is it psychosomatic or is something really happening? I understand 60 Minutes just did a report attributing the illnesses from the Havana syndrome to Russian intelligence. Well, I don't know. Is that true or not? You're getting a sort of a tennis game of hitting a ball back and forth from one side to the other, and not quite pinning down what's at the core of it. So I have an open mind, but we'll see about it. Hitchhiker effect. Do people visit Skinwalker Ranch and then take home what I'll call an anomaly disease with them and start experiencing paranormal events? Well, some claim to do that, but there's certainly no medical information on record that would establish that as a fact.
True. It's no information whatsoever to back up anything, but we've got a picture of Tom Winterton with an ace bandage wrapped around his head after suffering a traumatic brain injury. Not exactly the way a medical professional would treat that, but that's in and of itself another story. I do think with the Havana syndrome, it was interesting to watch the way the media kind of started to run with that story, and also the way that certain people were saying, well, now we can't. Military service members are fearful when they're over, in foreign settings. And so the way it's being framed by specific people now, it's we should distrust the government. We should be uneasy if we are, serving the government. And those things to me set up some pretty big red flags when you look at not only the story and the fact that it can't be really verified, but also kind of the underlying message that it's sending.
Right,
But those
right.
are my thoughts.
Well, I have a wait and see attitude. I want to see what comes of this. I'm not going to make any decisions until then.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it rolls out. And like in the UFO, obviously the UFO community, there's been, lots of information over the years about this type of testing that was rumored to be taking place at Skinwalker Ranch and other locations. And so it's been fascinating. And do we have technologies like this? I'm sure we're experimenting with things, but is that something that's actually based in fact? I don't know. But moving away from that topic, I want to get to something that we had talked about earlier, and that is the way we investigate, the way organizations and people have investigated the UFO, a UFO case sighting over the years. And I want to go back. I just found this. This is.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
MUFON manual, right?
Yep, Midwest UFO. This is 1971. So guidelines, techniques to looking into UFOs. And you were mentioning, I also want to just throw this out there. I've got a couple of copies of this little baby.
Yeah, there have been many revisions of it.
And this was edited by Ray Fowler that you were talking a little bit about earlier.
Right. Yeah. Initially, when the idea for a field manual came up, MUFON collected some of the investigators at the time together and wanted some input about putting a manual together. And Ray Fowler took on the job, and he applied what he had learned over the years and put together, I thought, was a pretty good instruction book on how to investigate sightings and how to weed out and consider explanations and not to push out of the world narratives. It was a very reasonable document, and there were others after that. I discussed with you before. Alan Hendry of CUFOS did a very good book called the UFO Handbook around 1975 or so. And again, it just stressed approaching investigations seriously and not embellishing the data with frivolous beliefs and ideas. And that's unfortunately the beliefs being injected into the stories has created a lot of misinformation, where it's hard for people to separate the belief from the fact and so on. So if people would only go back to reading the manuals and seeing what they say and sort of avoid the more contemporary ones, because they tend to go into areas like crash discs and abductions and all. And I don't think any amateur UFO investigator has any business getting involved with abduction stories. They're messing with people's minds, and it belongs to professionals to take care of that. So I would just take those chapters out and lose them. But otherwise, read those things. Go back to basics. That's what they tell you in baseball when you have a bad string of losing games. Go back to basics. Get on track again. And that's what it is with the UFO topic. You go back to the way stories originally were investigated, and a vast majority of what you look into can be identified. Vast majority. The common figures in the past were something like 5% or so, 5 to 10% of all reports were hard to explain. The rest of them were identifiable. That's a lot of stuff that's identifiable. And that means, that it's probably not too difficult to figure out what was behind a sighting that's initially reported, say, in the newspapers or by letter or on the radio or what. It's a lost art now. You have to reinvent the wheel in that case.
You're exactly right. And I want to just talk a little bit about abductions and when they really became something that people were focusing on. Will you give us there? I know that there are people listening that don't have the historical perspective that you do. And so can you please just talk about some of the first abduction reports and then how this information kind of spread out through the UFO community?
I mean, I'm certainly no expert on it. We had abductions when I was involved with Mass MUFON years ago, and we looked into them and all. And I just wasn't pleased with the techniques that were being used. Individuals would go out and take hypnosis lessons and then immediately apply it to investigations, which is just beyond the pale. But I think there had been, I mean, if you want to consider contactees, abductees from the 50s and all, the spaceship would land, they'd go on board, or they weren't dragged on board, but they were certainly doing the same thing that had happened with abductions. But the contacts were there from very early on. And then I think around 1975, the stories became a little more witness resistant to wanting to have a contact, and people claim that they were taken against their will aboard a flying saucer, and some pretty lurid details came out. But the stories are pretty basic at first. Someone would be taken, examined, and released, but then as time went along, more of the information became embellished with a lot of other detail, lurid dreams, a vast amount of exchange between the so-called extraterrestrials and the witness, and the books would be filled with narrative about these things. There was one case that we dealt with in the late 70s where there were reams and reams of data from the hypnosis and from the witness doing hordes of sketches about what they claimed they could see on board the object and that they were on. And it looked pretty interesting as far as artwork goes, but you really couldn't make much out of any technology. I know some of the people with the group had tried to puzzle out what these devices and machines and artifacts were, and lots of theory and speculation, but nothing you could hang your hat on for sure. And I felt that it was a futile effort to try to do that. It was like taking someone's dream and trying to post some technology on it. It just won't go. So, but abductions became that, and became more embellished and more detailed, and it just became out of control. I recall when Ray Fowler was making a move to Maine from his home in Wenham, Mass. I don't know, it's probably 25, 30 years ago that he did that. And I went up to pick up some of his files. And we did that. And there were boxes and boxes stacked against one wall of his study that were all ready to go. And I said, "Oh, what's that?" And he said, "Oh, those are my abduction files." He said, "Oh, really? That many?" And I said, "Well, what are you doing with them?" And he said, "Well, they're being sold to a person via Arcturus Books." I said, "Oh, you're selling them?" I said, "Who is it?" And he said, "Well, they won't tell me."
Oh
I said,
my.
"Well, really?" I said, your material's going to someone you don't know." And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "But, he's got to get the material out quickly because he had less than a week to move, and he couldn't take it all with him." So the things went to the book dealer for the purchaser, and the purchaser received the material and paid for them. However, a short time afterwards, he complained that he didn't want them anymore, and he wanted to give them back and get his money back. And wisely, the bookseller said, "No, no, that's yours. That's it, final." But it's a gimmick that's pulled in within archiving, that you'll sell a batch of files or a book or some such thing to a person, and they'll want to return them after, of course, they photocopied it, and they get the information in the item, and they get their money back on top of it. But a bookseller won't swallow that. So they'll say, "No, sales final. That's it. That's yours." And I never found out what became of the sold files. They went to someone, and they were all rate followers, and who knows what happened.
Wow. I would have a hard time selling files like that to an anonymous person, to be honest, but
Yeah, I mean, I would have hesitated. I'd at least like to know who was getting them, in case I needed to perhaps fine tune something that was sold to them that I knew had to be fixed. But if not knowing them, you can't contact them and fix the problem if there was one to fix. But that's the way that's the way business goes.
well, and there's a lot of shady business in this subject. We know that, but how
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. But yeah, that again, that's an old archiving trick that people pull, and you just have to be wise to it. Sales are final. That's all you have to say.
And so let me ask you, when people are archiving, when universities are archiving, what is the process for them getting information for the archive? Is there always a financial component? Are a majority of the files, are they donated with certain,
Yeah,
criteria?
it's a mixture. I mean, ideally, they would like to have donated files without having to pay for it. Sometimes the files are, I think, rather important topic wise, so they may feel like they'd have to make a purchase instead of waiting for a free donation. And they do that. They often do that. It can be difficult within a budget of a library, but some of them manage. The more important, I think, the person, a topic, the more likely that a sale could go off like that. But again, the preference is just to have them donated, and then the university or archive would take over the rights to the material. And that's usually the way it works. I used to think it was a great idea, but now not so much, because at one time and it's not the only example, but there was a university locally that uh, had received the files of a researcher, a writer, and I wanted to see what was in them because it had some relevant UFO information. And I went and examined the materials, and I selected stack to get copied so I could take and read them at my leisure. And when I did that, I submitted them to be photocopied at the time, and they told me, "Oh, you can't do all that." And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, we have a policy. You can only do uh, about a dozen or 2 dozen at most pages at one time, but for life." I said, "Wait a minute, wait a minute,
Hmm.
wait a minute. For life? You mean that's all I can do for the rest of my life?" That's the policy. I said, "That's crazy. Why would anyone want to do research like that?" "Well, you can take notes, pencil and paper, and write down the information, but they don't want things photocopied because it would make the documents worn and dog-eared if they had to do that for everybody." So that was the policy. You have one shot at a dozen to 2 dozen copies for the rest of your life, which would mean you'd have to hire someone to go in there under a different name to get any more copies. And even
Hmm.
then, they could only get 1 or 2 dozen copies. I thought it's a crazy policy. I never heard of such a thing, but that was it. And there are policies depending on where you go with uh, university libraries, especially, where they can be very restrictive on what you have access. to in their collections. And thank goodness the scanning era came upon us, because a lot of that material has been scanned now, and you don't have to worry about only getting a one or two dozen copies at a time. But yeah, even now they can have some rather uh, dictatorial conditions under which you do research. I really
Yeah,
don't want to go anymore, because even with these local libraries here, the one in Boston, they've shipped out a lot of their information to off-site facilities, so, within a few dozen miles of the city. And I used to go in and put a call slip down and say, "Well, let me see this one." They'd have it within 30 minutes. But now, if I try that, they tell me, "Well, it'll be here in 3 days."
right. And that's the same thing with the University of Utah. They have different, storage facilities. And so you look at their holdings and then you make a request and then you can go in. And I did this with Frank Salisbury's archive, files numerous times, and make a request and they have them all there. And it was a very, to me, pretty smooth process, looking online and
Hmm.
identifying what I want and then reaching out to them and having that available. So I appreciated that. And I also want to just mention too, when I spoke with somebody who worked for the University of Utah Special Archives for decades, that was his job. He mentioned, I asked him about certain conditions for specific holdings and whether they redacted information from certain documents, and he said absolutely not. Our goal is to be transparent with information.
Hmm.
And so how do we square that with things that are taking place in the UFO world with redacting information and whatnot?
Yeah, there's a great debate going on within or among UFO researchers, that some want all the information made available. Others want to redact information, even if the information is very old and the person likely isn't around anymore. They still wanted the option to be able to take out uh, personal information, street address, phone numbers, things like that. Um, when I had started work on the NICAP files, CUFOS files, back in 2017, um, I often noticed that there were case files that had a check mark on one of the boxes saying that I don't want my name used. So I was doing it as a master file for CUFOS. So I would do those stories and all, and we'd never release any of it. But other files that the people didn't care. They just filed a report form, sent them in, and said, "Yeah, okay, you can use my name, do what you want." And those files are accessible. But still, with scanning technology now, uh, unless those forms are specifically checked off, all should be available. You should be able to read every part of a document. Some don't believe that, though. They think it should be still restricted for perhaps copyright reasons and all, although I don't see where copyright comes into investigative case files and all. I think
Right.
whoever the possessor is of the organization's records should have the option of deciding what to do, and give a good reason for it, so that I'm for seeing that information. If you check off, don't release, yeah, I'll segregate it, because the person asked specifically not to be identified. You want to honor that, or else you won't get reports from other people that want to do the same thing.
But when the
So
person has been deceased for 60 years,
if you know that, then it's okay. If you know they're gone. But some reports 20, 30 years ago, you don't have that certainty. If it's 60, 70 years ago, yeah, I mean, there's no point. What's the point in withholding? And often, I've seen cases where they check off, don't release my name, and yet their name is in a news clip in the case file. So if you go out to the newspaper, you can see their name anyway. That happened with Project Blue Book, where the whole case files were had names removed, and just through one little slip, they forgot to delete one name, and
MUFON did that
it gave away
well.
the whole thing. So
Yeah.
at times it's futile doing that, but many want to do it that way. And
But, what about like personal correspondence? Is there anything, what sort of games are going on with personal correspondence and having that information released?
well, that's another example I think of. Unless you specify, if your personal correspondence goes to an archive or a library, an institute, and you don't specifically state that you don't want that to be made public, it should be public.
Right. And I will say, as a prime example, Jan Aldrich was, where was Jan when he was looking through files and came across, correspondence from me involving me at this university? I had absolutely no clue. But do you remember where he was at?
I can't
Which
remember
university?
specifically.
This is where Dr. Haynes'
He's been
files.
to so many universities, I can't even sort them out anymore.
Right. Yeah, that's where Dr. Haynes, Richard Haynes, his
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the University of Wyoming.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's always good to know you're, in somebody's file at a university. But I mean, that's, that's the way it rolls. And I want to ask you about the, Jacques Vallée again and his wanting to keep all of his research, I probably use that maybe loosely, hidden from public view until 10 years after his death. I mean, that seems to me to be pretty unusual as far as things go. Am I wrong?
It's probably not as unusual as someone saying that there's a restriction forever. Those cases exist too, where they donate to a university and only authorized researchers approved by the family can look at this stuff.
Can you give me an example of that?
Not specific. I mean, in general, I've run across this in some library collections. I think at one time, the Donald Menzel files were like that, where people tried to take a look at them, and you had to get approval from the family first. Otherwise, you couldn't see them. But sometimes those policies change too, so I can't say that's the case now, but it was at one time. And it's again, you're at the mercy of whoever is donating the files, how much influence they have with the university. It's a lot of variables in there. You have to see specific examples to know how to deal with them. But yeah,
next time I am up at the University of Utah, I'll ask them about the way that they handle situations like that, because it seemed from when I was speaking with the person that used to work there, was one of the heads of the program, that just wasn't something that they dealt with a lot. That the material was donated and that was available and it was transparent and there weren't games being played with this information.
In the case of Vallee's collection, I'm trying to find a good reason to think why he would do that, and it's very difficult. I don't know what conditions he's thinking of that if he passes on, that nobody can look at his files for 10 years after he's gone. He's deceased. He's in the ground, and what's the point of restricting the files for that period of time, unless, and I thought after the Trinity debacle last year, that maybe this is the explanation, that he committed to that story. He had a book written and endorsed it, implying that it was a genuine crash disk story. And then very shortly afterwards, with relative ease, investigators kind of blew it apart, checking into the background of the witnesses and the circumstances of the reporting of it over the years. It just fell to pieces. And I think Valet and Paula Harris, who was a co-author with him, tried to do damage control on it, and I don't know that that's worked very well because nobody talks about Trinity much anymore. And I'm thinking that after that happened, that perhaps maybe there were things in the reports that Ballet examined that might have been a little bit loosey goosey and not well thought out, and that the 10-year restriction would tend to hide mistakes in the research so that you wouldn't know about these things until long after probably people had forgotten about them.
Right. And, you know, I mean, I think that this, you know, I mean, first of all, to me, for him to be so actively involved with the biggest hoaxers in unreliable narrators in the history of the subject, for him to be constant companions with them for decades, that doesn't speak highly of his choice in individuals to be associating with. And so I think those are things that need, you know, people just don't address because we like to hold people in high esteem. But in this subject, people need to prove their merit by providing reliable information and not always, you know, here's a dangling carrot over here. We're going to look over here and then, you know, all of this nonsense. It's
As you
ridiculous.
know, he's published his diaries
Yes.
in a long series of books now. It's quite voluminous, and there's a lot of information in them about his interactions with people and all. And he had no qualms about releasing that. Of course, they're likely edited from more material, but in general, he makes a lot of admissions and comments on people in there. Some of them are kind of uh, uh, odd, as we've discussed before. You know, the bimbo comment, for example.
Yes, the bimbo comment. Let's reflect
That,
on the bimbo
that he
comment.
made several times. He referred to some women, a couple of women, as bimbos for what I thought was not a great reason. Just it was like a throwaway comment about these people that I didn't understand, and I was rather surprised it got into the book. Maybe he didn't fathom what the term meant to women, but he made the comments nevertheless. They're in the books, so. And I'm trying to weigh that against what he did with his bequest and the 10-year restriction and all. I mean, it was that the kind of thing he was trying to hide. He made off-color remarks about people that way, or he could have restricted the case files in some respect with names and addresses, but there was no reason to hide the case details in them. So I didn't think that just personal information and all was a valid reason for that 10-year restriction. I just think there are some things in there that are embarrassing, like maybe the bimbo comments that are the real reason behind it.
Well, that should be embarrassing, but you know that's another story. I want to just read a comment from somebody in chat and get your thoughts on this. But he might be protecting his wife and maybe his colleagues at Stanford, probably thinking that any of them will probably be deceased within 10 years of his own death. To my knowledge, his wife passed away many years ago, and he is not remarried.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
And is as far as his colleagues at Stanford. I mean, I wonder, would this be in relation to Hal Puthoff and people that when was Puthoff at Stanford? He hasn't been there for quite some time, right?
Oh no, I don't know. Quite a long time.
So
Well, I mean, protecting his wife from what? I mean, I'm not clear on how that would apply.
yeah, and that's I mean, and those are questions I think everybody is thinking about. That, you know, okay, what would be the logical reasons of the 1970s? Thank you, Drew. That's what I was thinking about as well, as far as Stanford and Puthoff. But yeah, it is very curious that he has has chosen to do this, and I have
Yeah.
to say it doesn't look like it's above board that much. And thank you, Mike, for the wonderful comment. That means a lot to me, because I, as you know, have taken a lot of hits over the years to try to get information forward, and so to have that support is very kind. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that is like really, it is curious. I want to say Emily is just mentioning that Getting Spooked has a great series on the articles and Valley's diaries. And, reading his diaries is, it's like going down this rabbit hole. Oh, here's a dangling carrot piece of information over here. And now I've got to go over here. And but when you do like look at some of his comments on politics, some of his comments on women, as you just mentioned, things like that. I mean, his comments of going over to Russia and spending a couple weeks, going to the Kremlin, from what I recall from, one of his, I think it was maybe his second diary journal. So fascinating comments.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of an offset between the vast information content in the diaries, and then the effort to restrict all access to his files for 10 years. It just is odd. Why that would be the case. I mean, again, I just opt towards it might be some embarrassing things in that, and he doesn't want it out for that amount of time, unless he wants to explain it himself. I mean, I don't think he has. I think the restriction was slapped on, and he never really qualified it. So maybe that should be done. Explain it, and then all these speculations can go by the wayside.
Yeah, that is interesting. I know with I keep mentioning Dr. Frank Salisbury's archive that I've seen. I mean, and that is just, it's amazing, because he worked with NASA for a long time. He was a very incredible human being, researcher, and of course, he has family. His family isn't mentioned in his holdings, but I don't, again, if I don't know, I think it is very interesting that he's chosen to do this, and that does raise questions, in my opinion. But do you know of any other people in the UFO topic who have requested to keep their files, their holdings
No,
secretive like that?
nothing like that. That's kind of extreme. I mean, if someone doesn't want files seen, they would perhaps be expected not to send them somewhere in the first place, so that they would never be seen. But when you send out to an archive or a library, you're presuming that others are going to have access to it, and to place restrictions. I mean, it's almost like a lengthy restriction like that hopes that everybody that knew the person dies, so that they don't see them again. And it's highly unusual. I don't quite know of anyone else that's done that. None of us would do it. Jan wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. If I send my files somewhere, they're out in the open, and do what you want. I'll be dead. All the criticism in the world won't bother me, because I won't hear it.
Oh, you might.
Well, depending on your belief system.
Never know what's going to happen in the afterlife, Barry. This is
Whatever that is, afterlife. Yeah.
Ask Leslie Keene; she'll tell you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's probably good for entertainment, but I wouldn't necessarily take it too seriously.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting.
I can only be worried about what happens before the grave instead of after. Before the grave, I'm just trying to get as much done as possible before I'm in there, and doing it quickly before my physical or mental faculties deteriorate on me. And it's funny. I say that to people, and they say, "Oh, don't look so down and morbid about something." I say, "I'm not being morbid. I'm being positive. I'm saying the prospect of not being around forever motivates me to get work done."
Right.
So what's wrong with that? It's not being morbid. It's being practical. And I'm working on a lot of projects now. I have a lot of things going on, simultaneously, multitasking. Last week, I mentioned briefly at the end of the show, or the previous time I was on, to our space age panels. the daily postings that Otto Binder had put into newspapers back then for about 10 years. And I thought at the time it was a real great insight into the early space age and what people were thinking. It's a very good sociological insight into what people were thinking about. And I thought it was important to take that series and preserve it somehow because nobody was talking about it after it was over. It's still evident in newspapers. That's one of them. And they were wonderful. They were great little explanations in brief on technical matters. Sometimes he'd speculate, and other times he was just straight up reporting astronaut and spacecraft activities. And eventually, in late 1965, he became involved with UFOs. I think he had pretty much exhausted all the speculation he could do on regular space age matters, and UFOs were a prime topic. And it was an endless supply of visuals that he could give an artist. You give him a case file, and he can go crazy like that, drawing up representations of it. So he did that and continued on through the late 60s with these panels. And since they aren't collected anywhere in one place, I decided to do it. And I spent 25 years trying to assemble them in under one umbrella, and I have them all now. What I'm doing is enhancing them and cleaning up the images so that in the not too distant future they'll be available. You'll be able to see them all. Every
That's
last
great,
one
Barry.
of them.
Thank you.
Won't be any missing.
Congratulations. They're so cool. I mean, you sent me 4 of them, and yeah, they're fascinating. So
Yeah, I mean, and you know, from time to time they become useful for research and all because occasionally Binder would receive letters from people and explaining sighting reports that the individuals had, and he'd proceed to have a panel drawn up about the sighting, and it turns out to be the only record of the incident anywhere. Because the letters are gone now. Nobody knows what happened to all the correspondence that went to the Bell McClure syndicate that operated that. They're not available anymore. So the panels are the sole record of whatever he was talking about. So it's important to preserve all that in case it's needed for research otherwise.
right.
And I expect to have that done probably before the end of the year.
That is so cool. And I want to ask you too, because in Anne's archive, there are, and a couple other archives or files, holdings that I've been given, there are lots of files from the National Enquirer, lots of clippings from the National Enquirer. Will you tell everyone about the National Enquirer's demise and what happened to all of their work?
Well,
Do you want to call it work? Comedy.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Enquirer, everybody has the image of what the Enquirer is, you know, wild, crazy stories and all. Occasionally they got things right, though, especially in the 70s when they had Bob Pratt on as a reporter. He tried to be serious about it, as opposed to other writers who weren't very serious at all. And his stories became useful as documents on what he was looking into. He investigated various incidents. One story I always tell is when the 1975 overflights had occurred, and they were written up in the Enquirer, and that was I was looking for a nice, convenient list of incidents to file FOIAs on because I was just getting started filing FOIA requests at that time, and I wanted something meaty to latch onto. And when I saw the Enquirer story and the fact that they were being seriously reported, I chose that and I filed on it, and it resulted in the release of actual top secret documents, which stunned me. I wasn't expecting that at all. They were raw intelligence from the National Military Command Center, And that was strictly due to the Inquirer. And I say so in clear intent. I say how that all started. So that was fascinating to me. And from that example and a few other examples, I decided to make an archive of the Inquirer and some of the other tabloids. I segregated them all out and I put them in bound volumes. I have about 11 bound volumes of something like 1,300 articles from tabloid newspapers. And people say, what do you do that for? That's all crazy stuff. Well, I said, yeah, some of it's crazy. And it's also, some of it is entertaining. Some of it's serious. And it's what people were looking at at the supermarket checkout stands and what they were taking home and reading and what they were getting their ideas on UFOs from.
Right. Well,
They were getting mental
where to
impressions
begin?
of what the subject represented. That can. I'm working on a volume right now with a Spanish researcher on the influence of visuals, photographic visuals of flying saucer reports at the time, either actual photographs people said they took, or the debris that was found often that was hoaxed by other individuals, or editorial representations of sighting reports, all contributing to forming the public mind on what the phenomenon was. And
Hmm.
that's the important part. Not that it's all real. It just
Right.
it made people imagine the subject in a certain way. And that continued on through the years. That's what it's really all about. And the tabloids are like that too. So, I archive those. I catalog them. We have I haven't scanned them yet. They need to be scanned. It's one in a long list of things that still have to be done. But I have these projects lined up forever. So, there's no end to it.
Well, that's what keeps life exciting, though. And I just want to say thank you, Arlene, for the nice compliment. I appreciate that. So, talk about, because a lot of people that are new to the subject don't know about the National Enquirer back in the 70s and their panel to look for the best UFO case. Can you talk about the people that were on that panel and also the cases that they awarded the prize money to?
Oh gosh, I can't remember everyone that was there. I think James Harder was there, Leo
Leo Sprinkle,
Sprinkle.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think Hynek had some input onto it too, but
And Frank Salisbury.
Robert Cregan was another from New York. They had a panel of experts on UFOs or people who could technically comment on the topic somehow, and they offered a $50,000 reward to anyone that can come up with proof of aliens or extraterrestrials, prove a UFO case, which nobody could. And they realized that after a few years, nobody was claiming the prize. So they decided to, well, make it feasible for someone. They would all have a secondary prize in lieu of proof of the best UFO case. And that would be a $5,000 prize. And they did award that each year, that they had it to one person or another. I recall Travis Walton received it one year. I believe Lawrence Coyne might have received that, the helicopter crew in 1973. So it was a very popular feature because it made people report sightings to the paper, and then the paper would either investigate them or pass them along to someone else, maybe like MUFON or NICAP, and they could look in on them. And it worked out overall, but it carried the risk of someone creating a hoax and having the best story of the year and getting rewarded for it, which would not be a good thing. I mean, what did you think of Travis Walton? Did you believe what he said, or you think he's a hoaxer? If you think he's a hoaxer, then the money was a ripoff, and he got it through ill-gotten gains. But if you believe the story is real, then he got rewarded for his misfortune at being abducted. So it depends on how you look at it. But the tabloids were very responsible for a lot of the action on the topic over the years, and you know, we're going to make that available as well for people to look at. The Inquirer, in 2001, uh, you recall the anthrax attacks.
Hmm. Hmm.
The Inquirer was a victim of that. Uh, a reporter at the headquarters died after receiving an envelope with anthrax in it, and as a consequence of that, the entire Inquirer archive had to be destroyed. All of the files in the office, all of the celebrity files, the photos, everything was destroyed because of the possibility of picking up anthrax. So that's history, if you can regard it as that, history lost.
So who was behind that? Did they ever find out?
If I recall correctly, some person was blamed for it, but I don't know if they'll ever really pin it down because someone filled uh, envelopes with powder and mailed them from a remote location. There's no pictures.
That doesn't happen in Utah. I don't
Yes,
know. Shipping live anthrax? No, doesn't happen here.
no. But yeah, I don't know. Someone was blamed for it, but I'm not certain that was the final word. So, but it was terrible because all of that lost information was wiped out. All that's left of the Inquirer from those years now are the clippings out of the papers that were sold.
And I bet the conspiracy theories that swirled around that, like why, you know, I- I'm sure, I'm sure they're good stories.
Oh yeah, I mean there were also many celebrities and all that were enthused about hearing all those files were destroyed because I'm sure that there were some embarrassing things there. Uh, no, it was just a very strange situation at the time, but unfortunately, it involved a death, and they just weren't going to take a risk on saving any of that material for someone else to come in contact with.
That's an
So,
amazing story.
yeah, I, 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 I would like to think maybe there's a secret microfilm file somewhere that they kept, but I'm not optimistic about that. So I guess we're just going to have to deal with the what issues were sent out there, and also the Inquirer, that like tabloid papers and all, they generally weren't saved by libraries. You can't go to an average library, even a large library, and find back issues of the Inquirer. They weren't deemed worthy enough to save. So if you're on eBay, you can buy back issues now and then. It seems to be a pretty good supply like that. People saved them when they bought them and took them home and piled them up like other newspapers. So they're available, but it's not an easy thing to do. So again, we're trying to archive all that and make them available. We're trying to do television, news clippings, old TV shows. There's one recently. I was in contact with a fellow involved with the old game show I've Got a Secret, uh, which I think it began in the early 50s, so it was quite a long-lived game show. But they would have people come on and uh, they'd say what their name was if they could, and they would whisper a secret to the host,
Ooh,
and
we should do that.
the panel would have to guess through a series of questions what the secret was.
Hmm.
And one year, I discovered I was always looking for old programming on flying saucer witnesses and all, if they ever gave testimony on television programs or other media, and I ran across a few that were very interesting and all, but one which I've been craving to find was an old I've Got a Secret show. I discovered that in July of 1957, they had an episode of the show involving UFO witnesses. And I was able to piece together who was on the show based upon local news write-ups on a particular person flying out to do an I've Got a Secret show,
Hmm.
and to keep an eye out for it because so and so local guy was going to be on this program. So I was able to determine that the program had Nicholas Mariana of the Great Falls, Montana film, Ralph Mayer, whose film in Florida CIA examined, Carl Hart of the Lubbock Lights, and most recently I found that Childs and Whitted of the 1948 aircraft sighting were involved in that show. They were all on the air at the same time on this program, and their secret was that they saw flying saucers. And the panel had to figure that out from all these guys answering questions. And then Ed Ruppelt was there too, on top of it. So you
Wow.
had really stellar names from the 50s on the subject, all on one show. And being in 1957, it's not an easy thing to find. I did find out that there is a kinescope of the program, and it exists. And whether they'll put it on someday or not on, say, the Buzzer Network or not, I don't know. I'd like to see them do that. But the fellow I was in contact with, he's going to put the word out to find that show and try to get it on the air on cable sometime soon. So that would be fabulous if we could see that. That would be quite a little historical piece. So
Yeah, that would be.
that was fun to do. That took me a few weeks of research to figure out. And then most recently, I've been working on. I think in the past I've mentioned having done uh, some deep research into Brazilian and Swedish newspaper clippings during the pandemic. We couldn't go anywhere. We couldn't do anything. Just buy food and go home, and no milling around. So I used the time to look into these archives and pull out as much old press as I could from these sources. Brazilian press alone, I think we found something like 6,500 clips. In Sweden, we found about 3,500 as a result of those searches. Most recently now, I had time to figure out that something we always wanted to have access to, the French press. There's a site called Gallica that archives old French newspapers, something like 2,000 different titles. And I was floored because I really didn't know where to go to look for French press. It wasn't easy to find online, but I found out about this site. And I've started working on it. And it promises to be huge because there are many, many titles that I'm getting hits on. And it's mainly from 1947 to 1954. So we should have as much or maybe more than what we found with either Brazil or Sweden. We're adding all of this bulk to the history of the subject. Much of it, I'm certain, just hasn't been seen anywhere before. But it's going to take a while, like the other ones did. The Brazilian thing took 8 months alone, and that was almost daily work. So that I'm excited about that as an archivist because it's opening up sources that were unavailable to us.
And so who right now are, and that's incredible. That's going to be fascinating. Congratulations on putting that together. Who do you think right now has the biggest interest in mining data with regard to the UFO topic? Because we saw that Bigelow was clearly interested in doing that with the MUFON database. Who are the active players now that are trying to get that information? We talked about Enigma Labs. Clearly, they've got an effort in doing that. Have you heard any more about what they're up to?
Enigma Labs, no, they don't have any contact with me at all. I know they're very limited in who they deal with. They have a few folks on board that are involved in the subject. Alejandro Ramos, I think, was one from New York, and he actively promotes it. I don't know much about it. They didn't contact me. I haven't contacted them. I do know they tried to contact David Mahler at one point because he has a big collection himself, and he refused because he didn't trust them. He didn't know what was behind it, and he wasn't sure what was going to be done with the information. They had a tendency to want to have exclusivity over the information. And I wouldn't do that. He wasn't about to do that. So, just was no deal. But with respect to data mining, I know for years a lot of organizations wanted to do that. They just didn't have the means or the personnel to do it. I know CUFOS wanted to do that for a long time. But they just didn't have the resources to put that into effect like they have now. And so, yeah, and Enigma is something you have to look at as to what they're doing, what the purpose of it is, where they're getting their funding, what it's all about. I just don't know what's behind it. They don't tell me what's happening.
Yeah, it is interesting. And we mentioned last time when you were on the show a couple of weeks ago, just about some of these new organizations or whatever they are that are popping up online and are making themselves known on Twitter. And certain people are claiming to be the front people of these organizations or websites that are looking for specific data and promoting the UFO narrative without any substantial evidence to back it up. And I think, again, I want to stress to people, it's very important to, if you're going to a website and you're going to enter your information in, make sure that you hit that little about button and that it very clearly says whose organization this is. You can look at that organization, find them on Open Corporates. You can do your own homework to figure out if they're legit or not. And if people that are presenting themselves to the public, especially on Twitter, talking about organizations that they are the front person of, if they're not willing to respond to information about who they are, who's behind the organization, and they're giving information specifically, I'm thinking of a new organization that popped up that is trying to get people to call Congress and bog people down with this UFO UAP nonsense. A fellow by the name of Lester Nair is claiming responsibility for that. When you look at this organization, there's nothing on Open Corporates, and the companies that he is crediting himself with, heading up. Again, there's little data on that, and they all have questionable ratings when you look at their websites as far as authenticity. And so I think that, those are questions that would be great to ask him. I'll try to reach out again and find out more about that. But people need to be really, really skeptical right now with how they share information and what information they promote. There's also, and I want to mention this as well, on Twitter, there is a group that is actively promoting Andrew Tate, who is in prison for sex trafficking. He and his brother. And it's, so if you've got people like this or other people on Twitter, on social media, who are also engaging in unethical behavior or potentially illegal behavior, then I would definitely say that needs to be called out and brought to the attention of federal authorities. Personally, if there's online harassing and doxing, and this unfortunately is like going on, on UFO Twitter, and so it's pretty insane to watch. Do you ever get in and peek into UFO Twitter to see some of the things that are going on there, or do you just figure that it's better not to do that?
I look at it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with scrolling it and seeing what information is there. I take a lot of it with a grain of salt, though. But occasionally they make some interesting comments off and on, and occasionally there's links there too that are useful, especially when documents are newly released from different agencies. It'll go up on Twitter very quickly.
But UFO Twitter specifically?
Well, I mean, what's UFO Twitter? It's not a separate channel. It's just people interested in UFOs who happen to be on Twitter, and that's what
Right.
constitutes it. So, I see them as a consequence of looking at the thing in general. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's part useful and part junk. So,
Okay, I
it's
just
like
have to
a lot of things. Oh my,
Sorry. He
that's
wanted to say hello. He's saying hello to Amy
that's a
and
bigger
Dinah.
boy.
I know he's very excited about life and food, and it's good. So,
Before you asked offline about a little man photo. Remember that?
yes.
You wanted to hear something about that.
Yep.
Um, when I had requested the FBI files back in the 70s, among other things, there were just some odd little items there that didn't seem to have any context. And one of them was a photocopy of a photograph. I can't even tell if it was a print photo or a newspaper photo or much. It just it was so bad that I couldn't tell much of anything except that it appeared to show a little man, a little alien, being escorted by two military policemen, who I presume were American because they looked American. But beyond that, no facial details, just the barest way to see a photograph. The FBI, for some reason, kept it. Apparently, someone had submitted it to them as information, and they came out with the all the other documents they released. So I just sort of put it aside back then and dealt with other matters. And I had a conversation with a colleague out in Ohio, Dennis Polichis. I don't know if he's still around anymore. I'd like to find out. He's an old contact. And he had an organization called the Tri-County UFO Study Group of Ohio. Uh, and he just chatted up on matters. And one day he said, "Oh, what's going on?" I said, "Well, I got some FBI files in." And he said one of them was really weird because it showed a picture of a little alien, and he went crazy with excitement. He was all thrilled. What is it? What does it show? What is it all about? Where did it come from? And I said, I can't answer that because it was no context. It was just the photo itself with no information. So he said, well, send it right out to me. So I made a photocopy of it and sent it out, and for all the good it would do. I can't imagine what he could have done with it. Uh, and then nothing happened for a while later until I got a copy of Moore and Berlitz's The Roswell Incident, which came out, about 1980 or so. I opened it up, and in the text is a copy of the photo that I had sent to Polichis. I'm scratching my head saying, how did Bill Moore get that? And it was in there as like something that surfaced, in context with the Roswell information.
and can you really quickly, can you just give people an idea of who Bill Moore is and
Well,
what
Bill Moore was an
impact he had on the
author.
subject for people that don't know?
Yeah, Bill Moore was an author, and at that time, he and Stan Friedman had looked into the Roswell incident because Stan had been given information by a radio uh, employee in Louisiana that Jesse Marcel lived down there, and he told these stories about seeing crash discs. So he put Stan onto Jesse, and that's how the story started rolling. And then Stan had an acquaintance with Bill Moore, who was a writer. I don't remember exactly where he was at the time. Minnesota at one time, and Arizona at another time. So I'm not sure, but they worked together after the Roswell incident story developed, and Bill decided to do a book on it with Charles Berlitz, who was the writer to polish the manuscript. And the book came out, and it caused a sensation at the time. I think it was the first Roswell book of many over the years. Um, But anyway, it appeared in the book, and so I called Pelichis because he's the only one I sent that to. And I said, "What happened? How did Bill Moore get this?" And he said, "Well, I called Bill and I told him I had this photo, and he really wanted to see it." I said, "Well, I mean, did he ask about it? Did he want any information?" He said, "No, not particularly. He just wanted a copy of the picture." So apparently, he just took it, without any background or context, and slapped it in the book as something worthwhile considering. And I wouldn't have done that because it wasn't worthwhile considering. It was such a horrible picture, and it was clearly not security in any way. I mean, there was no classification on it, so they didn't think much of it at the FBI. It seemed to me like just random stuff that was sent out to them. But it wasn't until years later I found out where it really came from. And some German researchers uh, had looked into it, and they found out that it came from a publication uh, that came out of Germany. I think it was a monthly or so, but I'm not certain of that. Um, but they found out when it was published. It was published in 1950. And guess what date? I asked you that question, and he
And I
said, "Oh,
failed.
really? Yeah,
I failed miserably.
you gave up." Well, it
I
was
did.
April. It was April 1st.
April Fools, duh. Yeah.
April 1st, and that kind of tells you what it was. It was an April Fool's joke in a German newspaper, a magazine, and they published it. And there was another photo that went with it. And I now that I think of it, that second photo was with it. It was just like a landscape showing what Mars looked like, but I couldn't even tell what that was at all. But that photo was in the article with the little man photo, and that's where it came from. It was an April Fool's joke, and it was put in the UFO literature as, wow, here's something really to think about. No, it shouldn't have been thought about at all. It was just a
And you can,
curiosity, but that's a story that got a little bit out of control.
oh, well, and there's so many of them. Like, where do we even begin, with that? It's just never ending with the
Well,
stories.
now there was one thing that was conspiracy oriented that I did tell you about, and that's CBS. The CBS letter, the Thornton Page letter. Now I sent you a copy so you could, yeah, there it is right there. Just keep that up for now. We came across this. I think it was might have been in the Condon files, or maybe Thornton Page's files, but we got it from an institute anyway. It wasn't the Smithsonian. It was another archive. And you recall the Robertson panel from 1953. The CIA published a report, and they had convened a panel in 1952 to discuss UFOs. And they came to a conclusion that there was nothing to it, and that essentially a subject should be treated as not evidence of extraterrestrials or anything unusual, and that efforts should be made to delegitimize the topic with the public by going into the media, using media people to talk it down. People like Walt Disney and Arthur Godfrey were mentioned as two specifics that the CIA should approach and have them get the message out that there's nothing to flying saucers. So there's no evidence that they got to Godfrey at all. Godfrey was like a Johnny Carson figure at the time during the 50s, and it was interesting that they were thinking about approaching him, because not too long after that, originally he was a skeptic about the subject. He would rail against flying saucer reports, but some years after that, he actually had his own sightings, and it was published, and he did a complete 180 on flying saucers. He thought there was something to it that has to be considered, and if the CIA had enlisted him to do debunking, it would have blown up on them, because he turned around and changed his mind completely. on the whole thing. And Walt Disney, they had produced a film in 1961 with I think it was Jonathan Winters, and it was a short. It was a cartoon short on UFOs, and it was really kind of a silly thing. It was amusing. It was Walt Disney, but it wasn't meant to make the subject look very good. And we used it at the 1981 MUFON Symposium at MIT. The Disney Productions sent the film out to us to use free. They didn't charge for it or anything. So that was great. But then some years later, I came across this letter that you had up, and it's from Thornton Page to Fred Durant, who was the author of the CIA report. And Page made a comment which really opened eyes. He said that there was a CBS special that was produced in 1966 reacting to the swamp gas wave during that time. And there was a lot of anticipation for the show because CBS was behind it, and people thought, oh boy, here we go. Here's some evidence we're going to see. And unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be that way. It was a real hit piece on the topic. I was 13 years old at the time, and I was not happy at all. I thought, oh yeah, well, here we go. Here's the government doing it again. But what we didn't know was that this was an example, that one special of the CIA policy talked about at the Robertson panel actually being put into effect. They specifically said, Thornton Page was a member of the panel. He said, we're using the CIA approach to construct this special. And it was a blatant admission that, yeah, here it is. They were doing what they wanted to do years earlier. And it was an opportunity that they found useful to finally enact the Robertson panel. And I was kind of floored by it. It's really evidence that they manipulated media to do what this CIA entity wanted them to do.
But I mean, didn't Donald Kehoe manipulate the media? I mean, aren't people?
Well, he manipulated it in the other direction, right? He was convinced that they were aliens from Mars and other planets, and he pushed that narrative, and that was his whole thing. But he wasn't a government agency or a government employee pushing it. He was a private citizen at the time. In this case, you had the CIA behind it originally, and then Page, as a former member of the panel, actively putting it into force.
So would there be a need to tamp down on information that was coming forward about UFOs that was inaccurate? I mean, I think that, again, this kind of like, we always hear people say that the government is withholding evidence of extraterrestrial existence, that extraterrestrials are here. I don't personally believe that. I think that's always, great for people to think the government's hiding stuff like that, but I don't think they'd be capable of hiding something like this for 70 years, just my own personal opinion.
You wouldn't think so. You wouldn't think so. I mean, yeah.
But I mean, so would there, when you've got people like Kehoe and his group faction promoting information about UFOs, creating distrust in the government and potentially creating a panic about things, I'm just throwing this out here, wouldn't there be a need by the intelligence community to tamp that down?
Oh, that's what the Robertson panel was all about.
So is that a bad thing?
Not necessarily, no. Not necessarily, but the government for a long time, I mean, behind the scenes, they were advocating involvement with the media like that, but overtly, they were saying, no, we don't do that. Well, here's an example that they actually did do that.
Right.
And it was a much after the fact admission.
That's fascinating.
Nobody knew it at the time, but this was only years later. that it surfaced, but there it is. It's black and white evidence that they did get involved with some media entities.
And I think that's, I mean, from what I understand, that's still commonplace today for
Yeah,
intelligence.
I mean, it doesn't say that everything that happened during the swamp gas wave was real either. It doesn't say that at all. It was the excitement and then the to do over it that they were trying to quiet down. Very much the same way 1952 was quieted. A lot of sightings going on during the summer of '52. It really got out of control. The press was going wild with screaming headlines and all. And then there was so much happening, so much talk that I think the Air Force felt it was getting out of control, and they had to put a lid on it. So they had the press conference, famous press conference in late July, and said that temperature inversions, among other things, are responsible for the sightings, and don't worry about it. And the sightings did drop off after that. It quieted down in August and for the rest of the year. So, this is another example where they felt they had to stop a UFO wave from getting out of control.
Right. And I just want to read a comment from Mike in chat. And he's saying, listen, we had an earthquake this morning in New York City. It was everywhere with footage in 10 minutes, yet people claim to have mass sightings, and you can't find one single video from anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Why is that? And the videos you do get are often not very good. You get maybe more serious incidents, but less visibility. And the more detailed visuals you get, the less credible they are. So that happens to be a theme in the subject over the years. Some of the most famous films, for example, like Great Falls in Tremont, Utah, all they show are dots, lights in the sky. You don't see any detail.
Right.
That's that's what constitutes what the unexplained aspect of the phenomenon is. If you don't accept the explanations that were given to them by the government.
Yeah, the whole thing is fascinating. And every once in a while I'll say, I'm done with this topic. I'm just, peace out. I'm done. You crazy people, go off and do your thing. But like at the end of the day, I'm hooked. Like I'll always be involved in preserving the history, in promoting information, good information, because the subject, like we were talking about earlier today, is so fascinating on so many levels.
That's a point I want to make too, is that this is not a matter of belief in aliens or anything. It's just the topic itself is so interesting, because to me it poses puzzles, and I want to solve puzzles, and if I can't solve them, and okay, we'll move along to the next puzzle and the next one, and you accumulate a big pile of puzzles. If anything unusual is in that pile of puzzles, well, someday we may figure it out. Someday we may never figure it out. But it's there, and it's interesting. The effort to identify and investigate is always an interesting thing to do, especially with the kind of topic you're dealing with. The possibility of aliens from space is fascinating. But whether it's number one happening or number two provable, those are big question marks. Leave them as question marks for now until we get better information. If there's better information on it out there, we expect to see it. And if not, it's a social phenomenon, social psychological phenomenon that's fascinating.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, the way that media is used, to influence the topic. I was talking on Emily's show, last Saturday about being a child of, growing up watching the X-Files and watching Close Encounters and crying when I saw E.T., because I'm a very sensitive person when it comes to, space aliens. But like I just, all of these things just, they shape you as a person.
I was with this subject way before X-Files. I was on board with it as far as trying to fathom it. There were no TV shows on except, things like My Favorite Martian or Lost in Space or Star Trek. Those were the prominent things at the time. but they
Right. But
weren't really UFO related.
if you
And
hear
I,
heavy breathing, this is this right here, so we know.
well, I think that if anything's going to come close to an extraterrestrial, that's it right there.
I would say so. As big as West Texas. That's my little kitty. But
Is there a zipper on his back?
there should be. But I think that it's like I said, this is so fascinating. I mean, the whole subject, and I think scholars really have missed the boat on the importance of this topic and how it affects society, how it affects belief systems, how it can be used by specific groups to promote conspiracy theories that are detrimental to an individual or detrimental to a culture, a society as a whole. I think there's so many aspects to this that we need to, people need to take that seriously, and I'm really happy to see that more people are beginning to do that, and not simply from the perspective that we're trying to prove that extraterrestrials are here. Because as of today, no information that really solidifies that deal. But the
Right.
topic is important. The history is important.
The controversy is fascinating.
It absolutely.
Not necessarily aliens visiting, but it's still the controversy is intriguing. I remember the conversation I had with Phil Klass once when I visited Washington. We went to his private club and we had dinner, and I said to him, I said, why are you in this subject? Why do you stay with it? You're a skeptic. You don't think there's anything to it. And he had a very short answer for me. He says, I'm hooked. That's all he said. I said, I got it. I got what he was meaning. It doesn't matter whether you can debunk the whole thing. The subject is interesting, and he stuck with it till the end.
And I absolutely, and it is fascinating to see the way it gets a hold of you. And every time I'm interviewing a guest, I mean, it goes back to, I mean, they picked up a news, magazine when they were a child, or they watched a certain show, or, different, I mean, it's just fascinating to see the way people's origin stories and how they got hooked on the subject, and then to see their continual lifelong fascination with the topic, even though their beliefs or ideas about the topic have evolved or devolved over time. It's a trip, and it is really, that keeps me going. When I get sick of the nonsense going on, it's just from stepping back and looking at all that. And then also the fact that as a person, have learned so much about a wide variety of topics. I'm really grateful that I have been involved in this, and I have learned a lot. And I don't regret. I regret a couple things. Let me just tell you: shape-shifting werewolves and yada yada, bing bang. But I mean,
yeah, that's what I've told people, especially investigators over the years. I said there's hardly an aspect of science that exists that doesn't touch on this topic in some way when you're doing investigations. Botany, geology, soil samples, plants, biology, medicine, astronomy, you just name them all. They all have touched on this topic in some way. And
isn't that, I mean,
that's
it's
what
so
makes
cool.
it interesting, because you can use it as a teaching tool as long as you're being responsible in teaching it.
Right. And I want to talk, and I'm sorry, guys, we're going to keep going for a little bit because we're going to go for 10 more minutes. I'm going to make that hard deadline, and I will not stick to it, I know. But I want to talk a little bit about, because I think from like an educational standpoint, you and I have talked many, many times about ball lightning and some of these, things like that we have yet to really get a handle on. And some of, I love that. Like, talk a little bit about Bill Corliss, because I think a majority of people don't know who he is.
Yeah, Bill Corliss lived in Washington or Washington area, and he was like a modern day Charles Fort. He he's read Fort and he learned from it. So one of the things he wanted to do was compile anomalies, scientific anomalies from scientific sources. He was very particular about the sources he consulted. He wanted them to be technical publications or the weather magazines, astronomy journals, and so on, in all fields, all scientific fields. And he published a series of what he called source books, which collected all the references. And he often illustrated them with very interesting drawings of some of the phenomena that he had collected from all these sources. And he was able to gather many examples under certain categories of phenomena that not only happened once, but often reoccurred. Like ball lightning, like transient lunar phenomena, in certain effects in other sciences that repeated themselves, and to show that maybe there's something here to be discovered that we're not looking at enough because they're called anomalies. They're called unexplained events, and people just often dismiss these things with a wave of the hand, like they're not important. And he felt they were important, and it's important to put them on the record and consider them, even if you couldn't prove anything with the data at hand. At least you got them on the record to show that look, it's this category of oddity that's there, and maybe we can do something. So he did that for many years, and issued a whole series of source books on it. I have a shelf devoted to just
Right, I do too. Yeah.
But I find myself going back to them often, looking things up, old things that I'd almost forgotten that I wanted to review again. There was a case, I think, in Washington State years ago, back in the 80s, early 80s, of I don't know if anyone remembers it, the cookie cutter episode.
Yeah, there were several actually.
Out in the wild, there was
Right.
pardon?
There were several reports
Oh
of.
yeah, there's more than one. Yeah,
Yes.
but this one in
Yeah.
particular I remember is this. Apparently, a large chunk of soil was carved out of the ground in a very regular pattern and taken feet away and dumped upside down, intact. Which, with a large slab of soil like that, that's very difficult to do. To keep it in one piece. But this thing came out of the ground and moved and turned upside down. There was no evidence of heavy equipment, uh, uh, tracks or wheels or anything like that. It just seemed to happen out of the blue. And geologists were up there trying to figure out what occurred. They didn't understand it very well. They thought it might have been some sort of an earthquake phenomenon. Uh, but it was never really solved. And then there were other incidents reported besides that. And that was a fascinating thing to me. I found that amazing. And it's not saying aliens lifted it up. They're not at all. It's just a puzzling, odd event that
Right.
it seems to happen occasionally. Now, I mentioned transient lunar phenomena and ball lightning. Those are persistent things happening over the years. TLPs go back to the early days of astronomy. People seeing funny lights on the moon and planets and discolorations and obscurations and bodies crossing the sun and the moon and so on. No, and it was ridiculed quite widely by a lot of mainstream science. Oh, they're making mistaken observations. Their eyes, they were seeing floaters instead of real objects, and so until one day someone was taking a picture of the moon and they saw a flash of light in the moon, and someone else in another state was doing the same thing, and they saw the same thing in the film, and they were unrelated to one another. So the story came out, and the notes were compared, and it was unassailable. There was definitely the flash of light on the moon, and it was attributed to a meteorite impact. But that's okay. That's beside the point. The point was you had a phenomenon that seemingly was odd, and you were able to get enough data at that moment to finally put it over the top. It wasn't psychological. It wasn't bad eyesight. It wasn't floaters. It was something that really happened. And only by having that second sight of observation were you able to finally settle the question. Otherwise, it might still be going on.
It's so
Ball,
interesting. I mean,
ball, ball lightning is even more ubiquitous.
I know, it's fascinating.
But
I mean, and
that
there's,
scientifically, that's not proven either. But I can show you boxes full of scientific papers about it without actually having had a ball lightning to hold in your hand or examine under laboratory conditions.
I mean, and that's so cool. I love reading, I love going to the shelf and pulling out one of Corliss's, um, you know, um, not a book, what's a catalog? His
Hmm.
catalogs. And it's just, he was an interesting individual in and of, that's a different subject, but it's just, yeah, I love stuff like this. And these are things that, we're again approaching. It's interesting. Somebody sees something, it's documented, it's studied. It is, I mean, that people are putting things through a rigorous process, a scientific, process. And
Hmm.
people, we were talking a little bit, I want to just end the show talking a little bit about Avi Loeb and the Harvard, we've heard a lot about Avi in the news for different research projects, the Galileo project, along with he visited off the coast of Papua New Guinea to try to find remnants of a space object.
Interstellar meteor, it was called. Interstellar. It was different from solar system meteors. They come in much faster at a different angle, and they're distinctive. So that's what he was looking for, and he was convinced, based on observations of a previous asteroid, Oumuamua, as it was called back then, that they thought it might have been something coming in from a civilization. It was a very elongated object. It looked very strange, like a big cigar, elongated cigar, and he was convinced there was something technological about it. We only glimpsed it while it was leaving the solar system. We never even had a good clear look at it. It was on its way out. So, but he wrote a book on it and gave his case for it being technological. Others objected to it. They said no way. And he's kind of having a clash with people over at Harvard over it. Some of the scientists there think he's crazy and he should back off. But he went out and there was another interstellar meteor incident in 2014 that he looked into. He wanted to find physical evidence. So he went out to near Papua New Guinea to find the area where the object had detonated in the air and left debris. He claimed to have found debris, microscopic debris apparently, and he felt that was evidence of the object again being technological. I fail to see it. I couldn't see it in the data he was talking about, and a lot of other people couldn't either. But that was his claim,
Right.
and he's still out there promoting it.
And cryptocurrency too. But it is
Yeah.
really, it is interesting to see. I did reach out to him a while ago to invite him on the show. We have also done at EFR, we did a FOIA request on the Galileo project, which did, you can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to see what we did get from the FBI in response to the FOIA request we did on the Galileo project. We did reach out to Dr. Loeb on this topic, and so you can go read about that. But he did respond. So anyway, I just want to thank you, Barry, because this has been we've talked for 6 hours today now.
Close to it. Doesn't seem
It's
like
amazing. I never, and it's always, I love it because you have so much knowledge, so much, you knew these people, and you've been documenting and preserving different researchers' histories, all the case reports from NICAP, and now Dave Marler's got the APRO files and all of these things. It's just really, I love it. I love talking with you. I know that all the viewers in the audience appreciate listening and learning from you. And so thank you for coming on the show and for, always being available to talk to me and have great discussions. That's
No,
really
I appreciate
incredible.
being invited on all the time for this.
I know it's fun. I love it. And I think it's great. It's important. History is important. So, and the history of this topic is important, and more people are going to realize how important that is. I do believe we're going to make sure we keep pushing that forward. So thank you, Barry, for everything.
No, you bet.
And I will let you go get some sleep. But I'll probably call you later. Who am I kidding?
I get plenty of sleep. I'm not worried about that.
Yes, I'm finding that I need more sleep lately, so that's good. But I love it.
You know what? Get it. Don't cheat yourself of sleep. You need it for your health.
Yes, sleep is good. I definitely am catching up on a lot of not getting a lot of sleep, so this is good. But thank you for everything, Barry, and you're wonderful. And I want to just thank everybody out there for your support, for your love, for always being here. And again, I just want to say how wonderful it is to see a chat room with people who are so respectful, who have maybe differing opinions, but we all come back to being respectful of each other and just wanting to know good information, factual information. I want to give a shout out to Jack Brewer for being just a huge help. He is, the backbone of Expanding Frontiers Research. And so thank you, Jack, for all you do. I mentioned going to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to pledge your support for our continued work, to look at the blogs and the videos that we have contributed, and to look at the archive. Barry Greenwood has been a wonderful supporter in giving us files to put out there so they're publicly available. Thank you. This is a group effort, like I say. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank Peter for getting the word out on social media. I want to thank Mario for doing such a great job behind the scenes, and personally for supporting me over the years. So thanks, you guys. I love you, and I will catch you next week. So stay safe. All right. Peace out.